At first hearing, such reports sound like pure fantasy, but I've listened to sane, sincere people who are quite convinced it has happened to them.
I was out walking with my 2 children, and as we were walking back, my daughter said, "Mum, the moon's coming towards us." And this oval object was just hurtling through the sky. This thing then dropped vertically into a field, and it just hovered roughly 2 foot off the ground, and we just stood there transfixed. We couldn't do a thing.
And I remembered being outside my window in midair, bathed in a bluish-white light, very bright light. And I remember looking up and seeing the underside of this, and I knew that was a craft. It opened like a clam, and inside there were different color lights, which really frightened me because I was going towards it.
I remember me being in this big, round, massive big room, and it was that bright. Everything was sort of really white, and you saw these small beams putting me on this sort of table.
These creatures showed me strange things which I did not understand. Even now, I don't understand what I saw. And I was in horrible pain. It just was crazy.
You may find listening to these stories of claimed abductions disturbing. I certainly did, even while keeping a rigorously open mind about whether they could be true or not. The so-called aliens that these people describe are mainly small, grey, black-eyed creatures with domed heads, and reports of them first appeared in America in the early 1960s. Since then, claims have gradually multiplied worldwide, and 2 investigators have won prominence through books published internationally. One is successful New York artist Bud Hopkins, author of Missing Time and Intruders. The other is David M. Jacobs, a history professor who wrote Secret Life. I flew to the United States and talked to David Jacobs in his snowbound Victorian villa outside Philadelphia, among heaps of new unopened letters from claimed abductees. I met Bud Hopkins and, as you'll hear, his 2 lively cats in his Manhattan studio loft. There he has conducted many sessions of memory-jogging hypnosis with abduction claimants who often suffer partial or total amnesia about the time of their experiences. Between them, Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs gave me a composite picture of this phenomenon, and Bud began by explaining what most people report to him.
They're taken up into the craft, floated up, usually up a beam of light. We don't know how any of that operates. They are then led into a room where there is a table and very little other furniture, and somehow they are undressed, put on the table, and then a physical examination takes place. People describe the attention to the joints, to the genitals, the lower abdomen, to the head, etc. The person will describe early on what seem to be sample-taking processes where little scoop devices are used to remove a layer of cells. We assume for some sort of analysis. We have no idea why. And one of the things that happens eventually is that sperm and ova samples are taken.
The person who is abducted wants to run, they want to resist, they want to not be there. They can't. They are powerless in all senses of the word. There are some people who will resist on all occasions. People will simply drop to the floor and force these beings to carry them. People resist in all sorts of different ways. I've had people reach up and grab an alien by the neck. We've had people who have spit in the face of them when they feel that they have some control over their neck and mouth. We see a kind of program here that lasts 24 hours a day in, day out, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. In other words, the amount of energy placed in this program, from what we can tell, is quite extraordinary.
Abductions can take place under almost any circumstance one wants to mention. I've had people who were abducted from a party. A woman was sitting on the couch, and she suddenly realized she was moving, floating off the couch with her legs folded under her. People can be taken from their bedroom at night when they're asleep, very commonly. People can be taken from an automobile. I've had cases where a car which contains 6 people is stopped. 3 people are taken, the other 3 are left in the car in a switched-off state of suspended animation. It can be literally almost any circumstance, day or night.
A lot of what you're doing depends on your hypnotic regression of the people that come to you.
You're an artist, and people say, well, how does he know how to hypnotize? How did that come about? How did you learn to do that?
I spent 7 years bringing people, abductees, to other therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, people doing hypnosis. And I sat in as an apprentice.
Isn't there a danger that perhaps they remember things that you want them to remember, or encourage them subconsciously even to remember?
One of the things I do is I tape record every single session I ever do, and I put the transcripts in my books. Somebody can read them. The generic argument is he must be leading them. And then you say, okay, let's find examples. And there's a stunning silence.
So what do they do? What is this doctor's table about?
I don't know how I got up on that table, but I'm sitting on that table.
Mm-hmm.
And I can move.
Mm-hmm.
I can move now.
Okay.
One of them, comes over to me with this thing that looks like a pick, a dental pick.
Mm-hmm.
I hope he's not going to put that in my mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm afraid the dentist.
Okay, well, he's not going to put it. Maybe we don't know where he's going to put it, but we'll just say we don't know. But we know you're okay the next day, Linda. Always remember you were okay the next day.
We have to remember that many, many people remember a great deal when they come to me. I've worked with a number of people who remember everything from start to finish without hypnosis. I have to look into each case that comes along to find out what happened. I have 3 options. I can believe that the person is a liar, making up a case. I can believe that that the person really believed it happened, but it didn't. There's some kind of glitch, or they were impressionable, or they saw a television program, whatever. Or that it did happen and they're telling the truth. The skeptics have it very easy. They don't believe that the third is even a possibility. I have to deal with 3 possibilities. I have a larger job of investigation.
Remembered under hypnosis or not, much of that sounds like the stuff of nightmares. Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs each say they know of thousands of such cases, and David Jacobs, after some 15 years of research, believes there's a single purpose behind it all.
Every once in a while, a woman will say that the procedure that is being conducted upon them is not an egg-taking procedure, that they feel that something is being inserted in them as opposed to taken out, at which point the beings will say to the woman something to the point of, now you are pregnant. The woman will come back from the abduction event, forget what happened, and the next day begin to feel pregnant. Now, she knows this can't be possible. She's had no sexual relations with anybody for a long time, let's just say, or it's just impossible. It can't be done. But yet, the feelings of pregnancy will persist. She might go to her gynecologist to have a blood test, and it shows positive, and she is indeed pregnant. But it's so bizarre that she keeps thinking this, even though the signs are there, it doesn't make any sense. Between 1 and 11 weeks after the initial event, she will have another abduction, and this time she will say something is being taken out. And they will take out a little fetus and sometimes show her so she can see what they have done. And then the next day, she suddenly feels that she's not pregnant. Her period returns, everything is normal, and she thinks it was just a bizarre and strange false alarm. Having said that, from time to time, women will be taken into nurseries where they will see many, many babies laying in special sort of containers. And one of the beings will indicate to them that one of the babies, or 2 or 3 of the babies, are theirs. And we think that this is the focus of the abduction phenomenon, the production of these offspring, these babies.
These things are going to sound absolutely outlandish to people hearing these things for the first time. How certain can you be of what you're saying?
Well, of course, these stories are outlandish to everyone, and they certainly were outlandish to abduction researchers when we first began to look at these. And the first thing that an abduction researcher does is try to figure out what could account for this that is not related to aliens or abductions. And the problem is they all say the same thing. This is important to remember. Whether they are extremely educated and articulate, whether they're extremely uneducated and inarticulate, it does not matter. When I first encountered this phenomenon, and I first began to do hypnotic regressions, and I worked with my first people, and it began to dawn on me that, in fact, this was something that might indeed be actually happening. I walked around for 6 months saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, every single day.
That sense of distress felt by David Jacobs, who is a genial family man as well as a meticulous academic historian, is often shared by Bud Hopkins, who has himself spent nearly 20 years investigating the subject.
It's a phenomenon that shreds the fabric of your belief system, whatever it is, because every single thing is, in a certain sense, taken away. One can be passed through a solid wall and taken. Well, that's impossible. How can that happen? It does happen. One can be somehow made to not be seen. People can be lifted up beams of light. People are missing. People are returned after these experiences with physical marks on them. One of the more amusing details, if there's anything amusing connected with this, is that we have numbers of cases where several people are taken at once, and when they return to their bed, say, if this is a nighttime experience, they're returned with the wrong clothes on. One woman, for instance, went to bed wearing her new white nightgown, and she woke up wearing a green man's T-shirt.
What are you saying? These are from other abductees?
Yes, from other abductees. People's clothes are mixed up in the craft. Now, how I'm trying to characterize this is you have this totally paranormal craziness of people floating through closed surfaces, going up beams of light, and yet you have this total nuts and bolts physicality to these experiences.
When you come to this whole subject, whether you're a journalist or somebody listening to this program, you really want evidence of some kind, and there is so little evidence. You have to depend largely on word of mouth. Are there any incidents you can cite of physical evidence for the abduction experience?
Well, my basic idea about the physical evidence is that we have every single solitary kind of physical evidence one could possibly want, except an object that all of science would agree could not have originated on Earth. That's the only kind we don't have. Have we recovered implants from people's bodies that are extremely unusual? Can't prove that it came from outer space, but they shouldn't have been where they were. Yes, we have. Well, this is this X-ray. See this thing?
Yeah.
It's a straight line with a curlicue out of the top and down the bottom.
It looks like it's a sort of cylindrical wire. And what do you imagine these implants are?
Now, there are three theories that are common. A monitoring device, a locator device, and a way of inputting information or controlling the person in some way. That's the paranoid. We wish, of course, that we had photographs of abductions taking place. I don't know that we do have many photographs of murders being committed. I don't like this phenomenon. I don't like this the entire business. There's nothing about it that makes me feel hopeful, happy, optimistic. It's quite disturbing.
The opinions and conclusions of Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs are disputed in other academic fields. Clearly, the experiences of most people who feel they've been abducted are real to them. But some neuroscientists, notably Michael Persinger of the Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, believe that such experiences could be generated by mechanisms in our own minds. Susan Blackmore, a senior lecturer in psychology at the University of the West of England, explains how this might come about.
I think there are two main mechanisms involved in producing abduction experiences. One is sleep paralysis. Now, this is a very, very common experience, very little researched and very little understood. We know that when people are asleep and dreaming, their whole body is paralyzed. All the muscles are so relaxed they can't move. This has to be so, otherwise you would act out your dreams. Now, sometimes the mechanism goes wrong and you wake up while still paralyzed, or the paralysis comes on before you fall asleep. Then you are in what is called sleep paralysis. You are awake, alert, you feel yourself and alive, but you can't move. It's terrifying, and I think that many modern UFO abduction stories are like that. I think sleep paralysis is only one of the mechanisms. The other main one is activation of the temporal lobes. Now, the temporal lobes of the brain are on either side, just above the ears. Although we don't understand all the many things they do, we do know that they are involved in all kinds of fantasy and very closely related to the parts of the brain dealing with emotion, and they're critical in memory. And also that if you stimulate the temporal lobes, you get sensations of floating and flying and déjà vu, that sense of I've been here before, and mystical sense, a feeling of profoundness, and so on.
You yourself subjected yourself to an experiment by, I think, Michael Persinger with the temporal lobes. How did you feel during that?
Oh, that was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. I'm really not exaggerating. What happened in this experiment is that he put a special helmet on my head which would deliver a rapidly fluctuating magnetic field across the temporal lobes and stimulate them into kind of simulated unstable activity. And what happened was several really bizarre, absolutely discrete experiences. For example, suddenly it felt as though hands had gripped my shoulders and were pulling me upright into a sort of sitting up position. If I hadn't known there was a helmet doing it, I would have been sure that somebody grabbed me from behind. And another time, a little bit later, I suddenly felt very angry for no reason at all. Then I felt as though one of my legs was being pulled and stretched and pulled as though almost went up the wall. And that reminded me of one abductee who told me that he was pulled legs first up a wall by aliens. That experience brought a whole lot of things together. I really felt after that, yes, I can understand how if something like this happened to you for perfectly normal reasons in a perfectly normal brain, that the natural thing to do would be to think that you've been abducted and someone offered to hypnotize you and take you back to your true memory and so on. You would want to go along with it, and I can see how you could very, very easily build up on that basis the idea that you were abducted and be completely convinced, as most of the abductees that I've met appear to be.
The views of Susan Blackmore. But are such views widely held? International gatherings of scientists have been convened to discuss the abduction phenomenon, and British UFO researcher Jenny Randalls has participated. Has she found any abduction consensus developing?
I went to the MIT Symposium, that's the symposium at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, a very major event, and it involved leading researchers from all over the world coming together to pool their research for 6 days on what we understand about the abduction phenomenon. And one of the tasks that I performed for that was a complete survey of all the known abduction cases in Britain up until that point in time, of which there were about 60. The consensus is largely one of confusion. I mean, I know I've worked with a number of clinical psychologists and psychiatrists and sociologists who've had no prior knowledge of what the UFO or abduction phenomenon is all about. And when they've dealt with 2 or 3 witnesses and they've realized that this is not the simple, easy phenomenon that they can explain away as a delusion or often as something called fantasy-prone personality hypothesis. In other words, that there are certain groups of people who have such a vivid fantasy life that they struggle to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. But as soon as they tackle the evidence, they realize that that explanation doesn't work. And they're left then struggling with a way to find an answer because it's something that they hadn't realized, that the actual evidence is stronger than they thought it would be, and that there is no obvious psychological explanation for what is happening. So the problem is, you see, you're left with this who do you believe situation. When you're researching the subject, you can't afford to believe anybody. Within these cases, we have a lot of well-attested evidence in terms of verbal testimony, but we have virtually nothing in terms of hard, solid evidence to prove any theory is true above any other.
Theorizing by scientists is fine, but one of the reasons I travelled to New York was to try to talk to Linda Cortilli, an attractive Italian-American woman who lives in sight of Brooklyn Bridge in Lower Manhattan. It's claimed that she was seen by 20 or more witnesses whilst being floated up the outside of her apartment block in a blue shaft of light escorted by 3 aliens. A glowing craft was said to be hovering overhead. Linda is the central figure of the Brooklyn Bridge abduction, the most famous case of its kind, and like most self-styled abductees, she has usually shunned publicity. But when we met, she told me what she remembered of that night.
I was frightened, and I wasn't just fearful of what was happening to me. I was afraid I was going to fall and splatter all over the pavement down below. I couldn't understand how I was standing out there. I thought maybe I was standing on something that was hard, a hard surface or something. But I felt a lot of pressure in my chest, which made it difficult for me to breathe. But I felt pressure in my tear ducts, and I wondered where the tears went. Because if they did come out, I didn't feel them. So it was very frightening. And then I didn't remember much after that except being inside the craft and sitting on a table and having someone scrape my arms. I don't know if they were using tools or their fists, but they were pounding on my back, and what I remember is the impression that I had. I thought that maybe they were counting my vertebrae. And then after that, I just dropped back into my bed.
Eerie though Linda Cortilli's story is, it's not an isolated case. Similar stories are being reported from China, Japan, the Philippines, Australia, South America, Europe and Africa. At the 4th World UFO Congress in Dusseldorf, I heard an interview with a middle-aged African. In parts of that continent, aliens are known as Madinda, and he claimed that while on an alien examination table, a naked female being clambered onto him.
She felt utterly unnatural. She felt like a dead body. You know, when you make love to a real woman, you feel the beat of her veins and arteries. You feel the warmth of her. You feel the heat and the smell. But this creature had none of those things.
What was the feeling when she was on your body? What was it like?
It was frightening.
Cold?
As cold as if you were making love to a dead body, sir. But I noticed one thing, Doctor. She had no bones. And then, the next moment, I was in the bush. You know, sir, I have had quite hairy experiences in my life. I have faced leopards and lions and buffaloes. It happens to anybody in Africa. But the experience with the Madinda was 20 times worse than that.
The case of that African is being investigated by John E. Mack, a professor of psychiatry at the Harvard Medical School and a Pulitzer Prize winner. Professor Mack has recently written a best-selling book called Abduction: Human Encounters with Aliens, based on his study of more than 70 cases. Struggling to gain some rational perspective on all this, I asked him if, as a psychiatrist, he felt reported abduction experiences could somehow be happening just in the mind.
No, it's not like that. It doesn't just occur in the mind, and unless we're going to extend the notion of mind to the entire cosmos being nothing but mind, because there are physical dimensions to this. So it almost defies us to break down the literal category between the outside world and the inside world, the physical and the psychological. It's as if that construction of reality, that duality of the physical and the spiritual, or the physical and the psychological, doesn't hold up in the face of this experience.
Do you think perhaps there's some way in which physically something is happening, but that something else happens in a realm which is both physical and psychic?
Yeah, I think that if I understand you, that it is both physical and psychological. And there's a very powerful psychological experience that these people have, which is deeply meaningful, very difficult sometimes for them to recall in full detail. Obviously, it's traumatic to be taken against your will and subjected to these intrusive procedures, to have to keep it, at least until recently, quiet because people will be ridiculed. The official reality of the culture says this cannot be. And then finally, they can't predict when it's going to happen again. It doesn't make sense to say this is entirely self-generated. There are too many dimensions to the experience which are not consistent with that. For example, it occurs in children as young as 2.5. I have 2 cases under 3 in my caseload, and those children described an intense feeling that little man comes from the sky and takes them up, and these are healthy, normal children, but they've had these experiences.
Do they finish up being harmed or helped by this?
Well, that's an extraordinarily important question. It is traumatic, it is upsetting, it is disturbing. On the other hand, when they face the experience directly, when they're open to it, when they recognize that we are participating in something powerful, I think it's probably healthy for the human species to be confronted with the fact that we are not the top of the cosmic hierarchy. I think that can only be healthy and good for us, but whether it's good for every person, I don't know.
Professor John Mack managing to find room for optimism among all these baffling reports. But David Jacobs, taking a trained historian's view, was not so optimistic when I asked him to sum up where he thought all this was leading.
We don't really know exactly what's going to happen, but I think you have to bear in mind that this is a phenomenon that exists for these beings' particular plans, goals, and objectives, not for ours. We have no say in this. We have no power over it, no control over it. And when they talk about the Earth, sometimes they will talk in terms of pollution is bad, environmental control has been bad, and so forth. They don't talk in terms of humans are suffering because of it. They talk in terms of the Earth having problems with that. But they leave us out of the equation.
Is it your impression that if it does end, that humanity will be able to breathe a sigh of relief and think that's over?
No, I don't think so. I think that it is not going to end by them leaving. I think it's going to end by them coming.
Ominous speculation from Professor David Jacobs. Whatever is to be made of these reported abductions, the fact that an increasing number of people in different countries are coming forward to report them and seek assistance is an undeniable fact. So I asked Bud Hopkins if he had come to any conclusion about what should be done to help them.
The first thing is, absolutely, a government has got to announce that it's taking the subject seriously. If their official government policy is, I don't care what you're saying, this could not have happened to you. You are either somehow mentally deranged to think this, or you're lying, because officially we know this can't happen. Now that's, of course, doing horrendous damage psychologically to the citizenry. So the government has got to backtrack from that policy and announce that we're now henceforward taking this seriously. We're looking into it. We want to gather reports and investigate these cases.
Research into the abduction phenomenon is clearly more advanced in the United States than in most countries. A recent major opinion poll on the subject there controversially concluded that 2% of the population, millions of people, could have had what is called some kind of anomalous experience. So I asked the Department of Health and Human Services in Washington if there were any plans to offer help with the problem. I was told in reply, "We have no information on that subject." And I was promptly referred to the National Institute for Mental Health, who didn't call me back. So lack of understanding and open-mindedness about this whole subject is obviously widespread, and this is hard to live with for someone like Linda Cortilli with her Brooklyn Bridge experience.
This isn't something that one would want to believe. It's frightening. But the way I look at it is, you see, if a person doesn't have an open mind, well, they can never learn anything. We have 22 people saw my hallucinations. Because when someone says that people like me are hallucinating or have sleep disorders, well, what it means is that others have seen my hallucinations. And if they can prove that one can see another's hallucinations, well, then they have the alien abduction phenomena beat.